I'm Ron Strickland. This webcast is one of a series in which I'm presenting some brief lectures and commentaries on topics from the courses I teach in literature and cultural studies. This present installment is one of two in which I'm saying some things about the socio-political, economic, and cultural conditions of the transition between the early Middle Ages and the late Middle Ages in Europe. In the previous webcasts, I focused on some side effects of the Holy Crusades of the 11th and 12th centuries. Here, I'm going to look at some early signs of the rise of modern individualism and the growth of cities, the growth of industry and commerce in the 13th, 14th, and 15th centuries, the late Middle Ages. Well, with these changes that occurred after the Crusades, with the introduction of luxury items, the beginnings of a banking system, and at the same time, and coincidental with those shifts in knowledge production and technology, over time, people begin to think of themselves differently. And you can see the seeds of modern individualism, the beginnings of a system in which every individual is expected to be more or less responsible for oneself and no longer beholden or obligated to one's family. And we're going to see that shift now in reading Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, and I'll be emphasizing it in contrast to what I would hope I was able to suggest about the ideological sensibility, the framework of understanding of Beowulf. But at this time, in the 1300s, lots of things are happening fast. It's a period of great social crisis. And one of the things that's most fascinating to me about it is the Black Plague. Black Plague happens partly because there's been an increase in commerce, so an increased incidence of merchant ships traveling from the Orient to places in Europe. And it was a horrible disease. Typically, you would see the first sign of it with a sore that wasn't healing or something. And if within a few days or a week, the person would turn black and die. In 3 years in Western Europe, it killed about a third of the population. And over a period of about 40 years, from around 1348 to around 1388, it killed half the population of Western Europe. Now, an interesting thing about that economically is, if half the people die, that leaves more resources for the half that live. It's kind of a boost to the economy. There's no longer scarcity. The availability, just more food, more space, more clothing, more everything, was really remarkable. So all these things begin to converge in the 14th century, in the 1300s. Economic change, new technological developments, the 100 Years' War, the plague, all these things are coming together to contribute to a shift in power that historians identify as a shift from the power of the aristocracy to an emerging merchant class. And along with that, the growth of towns and cities. And one can see succeeding waves of transition in societies for the next several hundred years, and that is a movement from the farm to the city, increased urbanization. In Holland, a technology was developed, power looms attached to water mills first, and eventually windmills, so that a lot more cloth could be woven in a lot less time and with less labor than having housewives with spindles and hand looms working in their homes to weave little bits of cloth. Suddenly, you could have a power loom attached to a water wheel and produce a lot more cloth. But if you did that, you needed to have more sheep. And if you had more sheep on the land, two things happen. One is you need less labor because it takes less labor to herd a group of sheep than it does to plow up some land and plant some crops in it, barley and turnips and so on, just to feed the people who are living on the land. So a shift begins to happen where more and more people are forced off of the land into the towns, where some of them will begin to work in these mills, at first woolen mills and later other kinds of mills. And there just wasn't as much need for them on the land. This caused a lot of social upheaval, but one result of it was also that it coincided with those other dimensions, those other effects that I have mentioned. Technology, the Crusades, the 100 Years' War, the plague, all of these things begin to work together to change what it means to be human, to change how humans live in a society together. It begins to matter less who your extended family is. Suddenly, someone who's has a very fixed and unchanging status in a rural community, you have to stay where you're born. Now, in the town, such a person might become apprentice, such a person might become an apprentice, such a person might eventually become a journeyman, a master, such a person might rise in the social status hierarchy, maybe become rich. And that person would never have had that opportunity as a rural peasant. So it changes how you feel, it changes what it means to be human in that circumstance. And the political power still rests with the aristocracy, but it's called into question, let's say. The Catholic Church also begins to lose some power in relation to secular society. Now, the Catholic Church will continue to contest the political power of the crown and the aristocracy, and the Catholic Church is imbricated, the Catholic Church hierarchy is imbricated with the secular aristocracy during the period. Bishops are often the brothers of earls or members of the royal family, or generally members of the aristocracy, and they operate just like the secular aristocrats, but the church exists as a parallel power structure corresponding to the existing secular power structure. I mention this especially because when we get into the Canterbury Tales, the whole setting for the poem is that these characters in the poem are pilgrims on a journey or a pilgrimage to pay homage to the great Saint Thomas Becket, who was murdered in his own cathedral by servants of King Henry II in 1170, in the year 1170. With that, I'll conclude this webcast. But, as always, if you have questions or comments, please don't hesitate to send me an email.